welcome to Books and Brews Light. I believe this is episode number 4. I should probably go check. And our guest today is Becca Block. And before we jump into your bio and your book, my brew today, first of all, it's in the Books and Brews mug. My brew is Breathe Easy tea, because I've had a cough that just is hanging on and hanging on. So not a very exciting tea, but what are you drinking?
I right now am drinking one of my favorite teas is Bengal spice mixed with coconut milk. So
that sounds good.
What I'm drinking right now.
I actually have on the stove right across from me, because believe it or not, I don't actually have a medieval tavern. I've got butternut squash on the stove, and it called for coconut milk. And that's not something you hear about much. So I find that kind of ironic. Coincidental.
It's yummy. I mean, I make everything with coconut milk because I happen to be dairy intolerant, but I've just found it to be so yummy for so many things that, that you might not think of. So
the recipe specified that it adds just a little hint of sweetness to the soup.
Exactly.
And I had powdered milk mix. We don't drink milk enough, just the two of us, so we tend not to buy it. And so I thought, well, if you want sweet, Moscato's sweet, so I tossed in a dash of Moscato, and it did taste really good when I tasted it. So I'm looking forward to dinner. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your biography, about yourself.
Yeah. So thanks so much for having me on. I go by Becca, just like you said. Technically, I would be Dr. Rebecca Block if we were getting all formal, but I always turn around my shoulder and go, who are you talking to? Whenever anybody says Dr. Block. So I used to be a writing professor. Most recently, like for the last 9 years, I've worked as a nonprofit executive, really focused on positive youth development. I have written both fiction and nonfiction books. The particular book that we're talking about today is a nonfiction book based on talking with young people from all over the country about what made for their most and least engaging learning experiences. Because working with young people for as long as I have, I've noticed that we've known for a long time what it takes to make learning effective and engaging, but we don't often put it into play. And I think one of the reasons is because we don't actually listen to young people enough. So my book really focuses on putting their voices at the center. And that's generally what I've been passionate about professionally for a long time.
So what inspired you to write the book to begin with? Was it what you saw when you were working as a professor?
Yeah, it more generally, but the specific exigence for writing this book was that a colleague about 4 years ago came to me saying that she had a student who had come to her in class and said, can you help me give a bleep about high school? I want to, but I just don't know how. And that inspired the title for the book. And the reason that it did is because, like any good nerd, I went to, when she came to me for help about how to help the student, I was giving her ideas and I was like, let me find you a good book. And I couldn't find one that was actually really helping to build an understanding and empathy for the student perspective. So it's like, well, I'm a writer. I'm a researcher. Let's go make the book that she needs. So, that's what sparked it.
So your book is about motivating kids to want to do well in school, correct?
It's about not just in school, about in general, what does it take for teens to be able to feel motivated about school or about other things in their life? Although I primarily focus on education because obviously that's kind of their main job while they're a teenager.
Right. What would parents find in your book? What would be, say, one or two of the top best pieces of advice you could give them?
Yeah. So I refer to in book talk since then, I've been talking about it as the ABCDs of motivation. So the top tip that I've found most useful as a parent myself is to use that as a kind of little diagnostic tool. Whenever I notice that my preteen, because it's very similar things for preteens as teenagers, it's kind of flagging in his ability to engage and feel motivated in general or in particular with school, I pause to check, how is he feeling about his abilities? Does he feel like the abilities he's being asked to use are ones that he has or he knows how to build? And if he doesn't have them yet, does he feel like it matters to learn them beyond just the specific thing? How's he feeling in his sense of belonging? Does he feel like his teachers actually care about him, that he has kids in his class that care about him? How is he feeling in terms of his choices? Does he feel like he had meaningful choices in whatever this area is where his motivation is flagging? Is there something I can do to help him see some more meaningful choices that he might not be seeing? And finally, D is for dopamine. So how can I check to make sure that he has the baseline conditions for dopamine to be producing healthfully in his brain,
Mhm.
basically,
Okay.
because there's a lot of modern distractions that tend to make that
Yes.
harder, specifically in the form of screens and sleep, which
Right.
tend to relate, right? When you're on screens too much, you don't sleep as much. And then both of those things fuel making it really hard for the brain to produce the right level of dopamine to sustain motivation and engagement.
Do you get into things like, say, dealing with kids who are on the autism spectrum or have ADHD and how to help them?
A little bit. I do more of that in my kind of direct personal work with families and
Okay.
young people than in the book. I'm neurodivergent. One of my children is neurodivergent. I work with a lot of folks who are neurodivergent. It's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. And a couple of the young people that we interviewed for the book identified as neurodivergent and shared some of the particulars about their experience. So I would not say that the book really specializes in it the way that I do outside of the book,
Okay.
but it certainly does come up.
I would love to see you write a book specifically on that too. It's from all I've read and heard, it seems like autistic tendencies are very much on the rise, and people will argue all day about why that is, but it seems like it is increasing. And so I would think there would be a lot of parents who could really use a book like that, and educators too. So,
Yeah. And it is some of the things do work differently. One of the young men that I interviewed who identified as autistic specifically talked about how it was crucial for him to be able to feel the relevance right now of what he was learning,
mhm,
that the sort of typical thing of going, well, this will be relevant for you 5 years from now, 10 years from now, just doesn't click, right? And that is
right.
frequently the case with young people who are neurodivergent and adults who are neurodivergent, right? It's harder to sort of feel motivated by something that feels really distant and abstract
Delayed
and far away.
gratification. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I
Yeah.
was curious as I read about your book. I happen to have 9 children plus my stepdaughter, but I didn't raise her. And my experience with parenting books is that, typically they're going to have some very good advice, but it's not going to work for every child.
Yeah.
So, one of my favorite examples is I've got twins, and these twins have given me so many stories over the years. And so one of the pieces of parenting advice I read was give your child just 2 choices. You can either read a book with me or go straight to bed. My twins would have been like, well, I'm not doing either of those. I'm going to climb on the roof and see what happens if I jump off.
Yep. I have one like that.
Um,
Mhm.
then you can relate. I've been in the ER a lot.
Yes.
So
Yes.
7 of my kids are boys, and I have always said it was either the boys in ER or the girls were there because of something the boys did to them. So there's um there's an energy about boys that I love, but it does have a tendency to land us in the ER. So it's been fun. But I was curious with your book, what has your experience been as to, do the things you're advising work for 50%, 75, 90% of kids?
Yeah. This is, it's funny. I have really resisted various folks who come to me and go, well, you're a parenting. I'm like, I am not a parenting expert. I am a
Mhm,
parent and
mhm.
a researcher and an educator, right? And I find it helpful to put all those things together in
Yeah,
thinking through how I'm going to solve a problem. And that varies depending upon the young person in front of me, whether it's one of my kids or another young person that I'm working
right.
with. So I resisted and I got a lot of grief for this. And even in some of the reviews on the book, they're like, this doesn't have the nice bullet lists at the end of each chapter that summarize the key takeaways of the exact simple
Mhm,
5 steps to do. Right. And I was like, you're right. It does not, because what you're describing matches my experience as well. There's not one right path, right? As one pediatrician I
mhm.
knew said to one of my friends when she said, I've read all the parenting books and my kid just won't, and he was like, well, you've read those books, but your child has not, right? Like,
Excellent. Yep.
yeah, yeah. So to me, what I've found far more useful as both a parent and someone who's been working with young people for a long time is to have a much broader mental framework Like,
Mhm.
how am I going to approach this relationship, but not
Mhm.
a really strict set of like, here's step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5
Right.
that I'm going to follow. Because the second, I mean, we all know this as parents, right? The second even you figured out for your one kid, they go through some major developmental milestone, and now even the things that worked for that kid don't work anymore,
Right.
and you've got to change it
Yep.
up again, right?
That's a really
Much
good
less,
point.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. So I don't find that the particular this book, I deliberately included a lot of different strategies, with the idea
Mhm.
being that this could be much more cafeteria style, right? So instead of it being
Right.
here is these set of strategies that work for most kids, it's instead here's a much broader menu of strategies that you can try and
Uh-huh.
see what works for your classroom or your kids at home. Um, and that way also you have some other ones under your belt for when those start
Right.
working and then they stop working a year later and you need something new for the
Or
next
for when
time.
you have the second or the third child. And,
Hmm.
I do find it funny that kids are so different. Some are just naturally very easy. And I love the parents who are blessed with the perfect child on the first one, and they think they know everything. They're like, well, why don't you just, and then the second one comes along, and the second one challenges everything, and
Yep.
they're pulling their hair out, and all of a sudden they're like, what happened? I was the perfect parent. Well, no, you had the perfect child.
Yes, exactly.
You-
Oh, it's a long-standing joke between myself and a couple of my other friends that have multiple kids, where whenever one of us is stressing about something, we'll turn to the other and be like, gosh, we were all so much better parents before we had children. Like,
I should be careful what I say, but there is someone in my life who had one child, 6 months old, and she was advising me how to do a better job taking care of 7 boys and 2 girls. And I'm like, you've managed to keep a child alive who can't even get out of her crib for 6 whole months. Maybe you should wait a little bit before you advise me. And I'm very carefully not naming names. She probably knows who she is. So I was looking at your blog, and you have an interesting piece. I'm just reading my notes here, that one of the things that helps motivate kids is agree with them that a lot of what happens in school is BS.
yeah.
Now, by the way, what is your doctorate in? Is it
So
education?
my yeah, it's
Okay.
education related. My doctorate is specifically in rhetoric and composition, which sounds like
Oh,
what?
interesting.
But basically, it's the teaching of writing and
Mhm.
communication, and sort of writing studies more broadly. So did a
Right.
lot of education focused, and all of my specific, both my master's thesis and my dissertation work were research into trying out different specific methods in an
Very
educational
interesting.
context.
Okay, so you have a very strong background in education, and yet you're saying a lot of what happens in schools is BS. What would some of those things be? And what would we want to do to improve that?
Yeah. So, for instance, I was actually just reading a piece that NPR was sharing earlier today that was calling out some recent results from a large scale Gallup poll that's done with the Walton Foundation every year. And they've been, repeating this. And even just in the last year, even just since 2023, student engagement, their perception in that 12 to 18-year-old range, their perception that school is engaging, that they're actually learning something that is
Mhm.
of interest to them, has gone down again. And it wasn't that high to start out with, right? So one of the things that came up that they were talking about in the study, and this matches what I heard when I was talking with students, is that this focus on here is one way, one right way, one preferred way. And then we have these other backup ways, right? So like the preferred way is you're taking the most competitive classes offered in your school, and that means you're one of the good students and you're on track to go to a competitive college, and like here's the one right way. All the rest of these we kind of treat as the like, oh well, I guess if you're not good enough to do the one right way, you could take these other things, these inferior
Mhm.
classes, this sort of like. And it doesn't actually give students the real range of understanding that there are a variety of ways to be successful in life,
Mhm.
right? Being able to go to college is one of them, and it is still a highly valuable one for many people, but it is not the be all end all for everybody. And especially for those students who are not interested in college, being told over and over again, well, the best path forward is to try to get into the best college you can, which means you try to take the most competitive classes you can and you get the best grades you can and do. And it's like, are you not listening to me? This is,
Right.
I want to be an entrepreneur, or I want to be, working in a trade, or I don't even know what I want to be because you're not giving me the options, but I don't think that college is what I want to do. Can I
Mhm.
please learn more about some other paths besides this one particular route, right?
Right.
So that's one of the things when I say like agreeing with students about how a lot of what they're being asked to do in school is BS can actually surprisingly help with motivation is that they have a very strong BS detector, right? They know
Mhm.
the least little bit of hypocrisy, the least little bit, if you're saying as a parent or a teacher, like, well, your best course is college in order to get a good job. But in the back of your mind, some part of you is thinking, I hope, fingers crossed, we don't really know what's happening with the workforce these days. Gosh, there's a lot of change, but I think
Yes.
probably the best one, right? If there's that least little bit of discrepancy between what you're saying to them in order to sound confident and what you're thinking in some corner of the back of your mind, they pick up on it and they
Right.
disengage, and they're not going to listen to anything that you're sort of saying after that point. Um, and so when you instead acknowledge, like, yeah, a lot of this is BS, this is nuts, isn't it? This system that keeps us churning through
Right.
these same things. Let's talk about how to make that work for you. What other options might there be? How could we work within or even against this system that you're inside of, right? That opens
Mhm.
up a totally different conversation and can unlock motivation in some surprising ways because it's a way of acknowledging, I don't think you're crazy. I don't think that you're making this all up or that you're just some resentful sullen teen. I think you're
Right.
onto something here, and let's
Yeah.
talk about what that means.
I had an interesting experience. Um, it's kind of a joke between me and my husband. We have a long list of all the things I've been kicked out of. And the reason this is funny is because I have lived the most straight and narrow life you can imagine. Like, I'm not the kind who's causing trouble. But among those things, I was kicked out of 11th grade English. And the reason I was because I was in 10th grade. And I had moved schools, and so I went to a private school up in Duluth in ninth grade. Then we moved to Minneapolis, and as a 10th grader, I was looking at the 10th grade English description, and it was almost word for word the class I had just taken. So I said, well, I'll sign up for 11th grade English since I already took this class, and nobody stopped me. But when I decided to take another band class, because I like to spend time in band room, they caught me. And we sat in the principal's office for hours upon hours, multiple times, arguing this with him, saying, I just took this class. Why are you making me take it again? And he gave me this long speech, finally said, you can do whatever you want, but when your class graduates, you won't be with them. And I think that's part of what you're talking about, where you've got a kid who wants to learn, who wants to move on. And my answer was to skip English 2 or 3 times a week. And so I did. And I ended up not getting the aid that I should have because, as you say, I was completely disengaged because it was BS. It
Yeah.
was a stupid rule. It made no sense to make me redo a class I had already had, but
Yeah.
that's what they did. So, do you have a reading ready for us?
Yes, I do. I'm actually just going to read straight from the introduction because I think
Hmm.
it's the easiest way into this.
Okay.
In New Mexico, a high school study skills teacher asks her sophomores and juniors to write down what they want to get out of her class. One writes, "Can you help me give a bleep about school? I want to, but I just don't know how." In Pennsylvania, a junior questions her mom about the usefulness of school. "What's the point of these classes? Why does it matter if I learn this stuff?" Her mom, frustrated, replies, "Ask your teachers. They should be able to tell you why it matters." In North Carolina, a senior asks his math tutor why he has to learn Algebra 2 to graduate high school. The tutor Googles what jobs use advanced algebra skills and is startled to realize only 6% of jobs do. "It helps with logical thinking," she says, hoping she's right. In New Jersey, a father acknowledges that his sophomore is doing just fine academically, but it just seems to be about compliance, he opines. "I don't care if he gets all A's. I want him to learn how to learn, and it doesn't seem like school is teaching him that." In Florida, a soon-to-be freshman questions whether he wants to do the International Baccalaureate program, a rigorous 4-year course of study that is available at his high school. He's done well in his classes in middle school, but doesn't have a particularly strong academic drive. His mother worries IB could be too much pressure. She's read the stories of how teens are increasingly stressed out and overwhelmed, but also worries he would get bored and even more disinterested without a challenging academic curriculum. I don't know what to encourage him to do, honestly, she confides. Online, a parent asks a Parenting of Teens Facebook group why their kid is so apathetic about school. Is there something wrong with them? Is this just the effects of COVID lingering, or is something else going on? Another parent responds that her son became so miserable in high school, he basically withdrew to the basement of their house. He graduated 6 months ago, but he still doesn't know what's next. I've tried to get him to see a range of options, different kinds of colleges, work, service. I don't know if I'm pushing too hard or not enough. If any of these stories ring true, you're not alone. While it's nothing new for students, especially teens, to dislike school, the cumulative effects of the last few years, COVID lockdowns, teacher and student burnout, staffing shortages, political tensions, rapid technological change, and the ever-increasing cost of college, have made school somehow feel both highly stressful and mostly irrelevant to many students, families, and educators. For the lucky students, school only sucks occasionally. For the unlucky, it's a miserable experience every single day. Though it may be most visible in the students who are struggling academically or in those who are visibly depressed, withdrawn, or anxious, even the students we spoke with who were academically successful and not struggling with their mental health felt like school was very rarely about engaged learning and far more often about simply performing well enough to either get by or meet expectations.
There is so much truth in that. And I think some of my kids struggled for many of those reasons. I am curious, what are your fiction books about?
Oh, my fiction books are totally fluff. They're
Fluff?
they're under a pseudonym, and they're like vampires, dragons, elves, that
Okay.
kind of stuff. Just fun stuff that allowed me to get through the rigors of academic professorial life by having a whole separate fantasy world.
The author I just talked to said a similar thing. She's also a PhD and wrote children's books. And over the years, we've been doing this. The full hour podcast I do is with the co-host. And we've been doing that since I think 2017. And over the years, we've met several people who have very high levels of education, at least a master's, some of them with PhDs, and then they write romance, complete fluff romance. But I think sometimes we need that, our brain just needs to relax. I mean, like my husband has a PhD and his work is very intellectual, and then he just wants to go out and mow the lawn, and it's fun. It's
Yeah.
relaxing after using your mind so hard all day. And just for fun, what are your favorite books to read?
Oh, my favorite books to read. I just finished last night a book called The Husbands by, oh gosh, what was the author's name? Now I'm blanking on the author's name. That's terrible. But it was just I like books that have elements of magical realism, I should say. So in this book, the whole premise is this woman has, she like walks into her apartment and there's this guy that she does not know there. And she's all freaked out. And it turns out that he's her husband. That somehow she's ended up in this, alternate universe, and it turns out it's her attic, that anytime whoever her husband is goes up to the attic, it gets swapped for another husband and the other life that whatever
Oh my
it was that
goodness.
she was living. And it was just this delightful, quirky read, right? It was interesting and thought-provoking, but it did not depress me and cause me to feel despair about the
Right.
state of the world, right? So I love books like that make me think without making me weep.
But
So-
right. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And if you can forward the name of that on to me, I would love to hear about that. Do you write under your own name, your fiction?
So my fiction is I've written under the name Noelle Ryan. So Noelle Ryan, Ryan. I have 2 fiction books out under that name as part of a series, and a third one that is drafted, but I don't know if and when I'll get around to releasing it. So So yeah, those are books with, like I said, they're like, vampires, dragons, elves, that kind of thing, all
Right.
set in modern day setting.
What is your best advice to writers who would like to follow in your footsteps?
My best advice, 2 pieces of advice. One is schedule a time that you are going to write every single week
Mhm.
and stick to it, right? So in my case, my writing time is Saturday and Sunday mornings. That is when I bend my usual parenting rules about screen time and let my kids have screens. And that's when I wrote this nonfiction book. That's when I wrote my fiction books. That's my time to work on projects. And related to that means that I am actually working on the projects, right? That I don't allow myself to do a bunch of
Right.
productive feeling research that is not really actually getting the book
It
done.
is so easy to get lost in those rabbit holes.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
when I was writing, I all of a sudden realized when I started, I knew nothing about the 1300s, except I had watched Braveheart. That was like the extent of my knowledge. And so one day, as I'm dressing my characters, I realized I don't know if they had buttons, and I ended up a day and a half trying to find out when buttons came into
Yes,
existence.
yes, exactly. It's
So,
so easy to end up in those. I saw some funny meme in a writer's group where it was like, little comic strip showing, he sat down at his, and then the pause, and the next thing is like 6 hours later, oak desk, right? Like just, that much time just to figure out what's the material this character would have used at this time
right.
in this setting, right? For their
I've
desk.
seen
Yeah.
that. I've
Yeah.
seen that. And a friend of mine who's from Japan actually had a very funny comment on that. Wait, but did you consider what if, and it had something to do with the culture he came from. Yeah. And
Yeah.
how many fiction books do you have out?
So 2 fiction books out,
Mm.
the third one written but not yet released, and then 1 nonfiction book, and then some academic articles and poetry and other things like that.
Okay.
So,
Oh, wow. You keep
yeah.
busy. Well, you should submit some of your poetry to my publisher, Gabriel Sorn is
Oh,
accepting
okay.
submissions right now. So
That's good.
each year we do an anthology of new poetry in classical forms. So, sonnets, villanelles, haikus, anything like that.
Cool.
It's kind of a traditional form. So, and the reason we do that is because I've heard a lot of very bad free form. I've heard some very good free form too. But I do think that when you learn to follow the rules, then you're able to break the rules
Yeah.
and free form well, very
Yeah.
well. And I know it can
Yeah.
be done well. So, I think that classical poetry is in danger of becoming a lost art, and I think that would be a shame. So that's we're a paying market, and that's why we do that. So,
Yeah.
where can readers find you online?
So they can find me at beccablock.com, BECCABLOCK. That's where you can find all my stuff related to positive youth development. The fiction books, it's author Noel Ryan. But
Okay.
those are, I will admit that my website there has not been as well maintained. I haven't been doing as much with that recently. So.
Right. I'm juggling all kinds of websites, and so do you have any upcoming events, book signings, anything like that that people can come to?
Yeah, yes, I actually do with my publisher. There's going to be a virtual event. I don't have the link yet, but there's going to be a
Okay.
virtual event in October. And once I have the link for it, that'll go out through all of my socials. But for anyone who wants to save the date, it will be October 2nd at noon. All the September events I have are local to the Philadelphia area, so
Okay.
probably less relevant for your listeners.
Some of them might be in Philadelphia. Hopefully, we've got listeners there. So you can find me at lauravosiga.com or booksandbrews.net or glenmerrillfarms.wordpress.com, where you can see pictures of our sheep and our big white dog named Boo Bear. We got him just before Halloween, and he's almost pure white. He's going to be as big as a bear. So his name is officially Zephyr, but we keep calling him Boo Bear. So,
Love it.
Yeah. And then, are you on Instagram, Facebook, all of those places?
Yeah. So Instagram is probably the easiest place to find me. It's at Can You Help Me Giva. So we just leave
Okay.
off the curse word that's at the end of the title. So just at Can You
Fantastic.
Help Me Giva.
Okay. And I'm at Instagram and Twitter as Gabriel Sorn. And I think on Instagram I have both Laura Bosica and Gabriel Zorn. See, like I said, I'm juggling way too many, so
I hear you.
that's probably what I'm doing this evening. So, any last words for our listeners, for parents, for writers?
Oh gosh, I always love to have conversations with people. So anybody who has a question, please feel free to reach out. I have a contact form on my website so that people can share their questions and thoughts. It goes straight to my email. So
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for being on Books and Brews. Cheers.
cheers.
That's plenty of time to slice off the end. So I'm going to stop recording. And then what I'll do tonight.